Hello, thank you everyone for joining us. My name is Scott Malborn and I am the Executive Director of the Schneider Museum of Art, part of the Oregon Center for the Arts here at Southern Oregon University. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing our special guest, Pat Boas. Pat Boas's paintings, drawings, and prints and digital projects have been shown in solo and group exhibitions at venues that include the Sun Valley Museum of Art in Ketchum, Idaho, the Portland Art Museum, the Elizabeth Leach Gallery, and Oregon Contemporary, all in Portland, Oregon, the Hallie Ford Museum in Salem, the Center for Contemporary Art in Santa Fe, New Mexico, the Boise Art Museum in Boise, Idaho, and the Salt Lake Art Center, which is now known as the Utah Museum of Contemporary Art in Salt Lake City. Boas is a 2017 Hallie Ford Visual Arts Fellow and the recipient of honors, fellowships, grants, and residencies from Yaddo, the Oregon Arts Commission, and the Bonnie Bronson Fund, among others. Reviews of Boas's work have appeared in Art in America and Art Papers. Boas is represented by the Elizabeth Leach Gallery in Portland, Oregon, and is Professor Emerita of Art Practice in the School of Art and Design at Portland State University. Please join me in welcoming Pat Boas. Hi, Pat.
Hi, Scott. Thanks for having me here. It's wonderful to see. I see a lot of old friends as well as some new faces, so I'm looking forward to it.
Wonderful. Thank you, Pat. I've made you a co-host. You may share your screen when you are ready and take it over.
Thank you, Scott. And I want to give thanks to Mel Prest for inviting me to be in this exhibition, in this beautiful show with a large number of really fabulous artists from around the country. I also wanted to thank Maureen Williams, the preparator, and Emily McPeck on the Schneider staff for all they did to make this a really great experience and a beautiful show. Pictured here, for those of you who are at a distance or have not yet seen the show, is one end of the galleries in the Schneider Museum. On the left, there's work by Mark Mitchell. In the center, there's the sculpture by Rebecca Goldstein. On the back wall, painting by Petra Saarinen. And on the left hand, there's my three pieces that are in the show. And I'll get you another view of this. So these are the works that Mel selected, and I was really happy to have them shown here. They're from roughly from 2020 to earlier this year. On the left, that piece is called Little Party. On the center is called Apprentice. And on the right, that is called Monogram 4 for SD 3 Women. And I'll talk about these a little bit more as we go on. So I wanted to start going back. I'm not going to do a straight chronological blow by blow of everything, but I did want to go back to a couple of projects that I did roughly 20 years ago, a little bit more, that are pictured here. Details of these are pictured here. A part of me is waiting for the day when I won't start an art talk with this work, but they remain a good place for me to begin because they allow me to locate my interest in text and in found print sources, and also in the actions associated with reading and writing. On the left, this is one panel from a series called All the Heads on the Front Pages of the New York Times in 2001. And for both of these works, I collected the front pages the newspaper for the year 2001. Just thinking that that was the beginning of the new millennium, who knew what would come from that? And it seemed like it would be material that I could do some interesting things with. And I ended up doing several drawing projects from that archive. All the heads, I took the daily paper and I traced all the outlines of all the heads of all the people that appeared on the paper for that year, and divided them up into drawings month by month. So there's a series of 12 in that piece. There's kind of a buildup of calligraphic clouds in blue ink, and these are done on silk tissue, so they're kind of translucent. They kind of have the same tone as that newsprint of the newspaper. And embedded in there are representatives of all the events that happened in 2001, which I thought was a year that would be thrown away and forgotten with the newspapers, like all years. But of course, there was 9/11, and so those events are embedded in there as well. On the right, that piece is called Alphabet, New York Times 010101. I liked that binary of the date of the first day of the year. So this is comes from the front page of the newspaper for January 1st, 2001. And I use solvent transfer to separate out each letter of the alphabet onto a separate drawing, also on silk tissue. So in theory, if you took all these 26 drawings together and laid them on top of each other, you could again read those stories, and it's translucent, so it kind of works. But I would exhibit them in a calendar format, again, thinking about that aspect of reading, which is something that we just speed over and take so much for granted, but I wanted to draw it out and slow it down. These were first exhibited in an exhibition called Slowness, interestingly enough, at the Art Gym in Merrillhurst, Oregon, which was a great venue that we had here that sadly closed down several years ago. They also appeared in at Consolidated Works, another venue that we've lost in Seattle, and at the Santa Fe Art Center, which fortunately is, as far as I know, still going strong. I wanted to start with them not only because they're an interesting thing for me, a place for me to think back and kind of locate my work as it's developed, but also to talk about, at the time I was making conceptually driven drawing and print projects from found sources such as the newspaper or my son's fourth grade homework, puzzle books, those kinds of things. And I tend to think of it as something that comes from my 70s art education, where a central concern that we had was how to make compositional decisions that were not totally subjective. And for a while, that was really important to me and a lot of other people. So I would take a found source and make rules looking for something that would be interesting to me as a way to make work. A main strategy was to select and retain certain elements according to certain criteria, while erasing or excising others. And you'll find me coming back to that at different times, and often, as here, I found a real graphic beauty in some of these sources, these things that were a little bit more laid bare. So my interest in text as a visual element led me to think about the activity of writing as a generative force for drawing. And in 2012, I began a collaborative project with Portland-based artist Linda Hutchins and dancer and choreographer Linda Austin. And over the next 2 years, we dug into the choreography of writing, the sound and cadence of speaking, the shapes of letter forms, and we made large-scale drawings often there was sound and rhythm and movement associated with that as well. Eventually, we did them in public spaces such as here, which was in the lobby gallery of the Wyden and Kennedy advertising agency in Portland's Pearl District in 2014. I think a little bit earlier, oh, sorry, my cursor is, Zoom is doing something with my cursor. Anyway, we also did had a residency at Caldera near Sisters in Oregon, where we used these big pieces, huge rolls of photo backdrop paper, and again, made up rules for actions associated with language and reading and writing. While we were at Caldera, we found a copy of a poem hung in the studio by Margaret Atwood called "You Begin." And I wanted to read quickly a couple of short excerpts from that poem. It starts out, "You begin this way. This is your hand. This is your eye. That is a fish, blue and flat on the paper, almost the shape of an eye. This is your mouth. This is an O or a moon, whichever you like. This is yellow." Then skipping down to one of the last stanzas, which was of interest to us, it continues. "The word hand floats above your hand like a small cloud over a lake. The word hand anchors your hand to this table. Your hand is a warm stone I hold between two words." So we used that phrase from that poem, the word hand, in a deliberate misreading for a collective title for the rest of our work on this project. And for me, it was because it conveyed the primacy of language and everything, but also that gap between language and experience, and this idea of the word hand hovering over what we were doing became really important to us. We did a public performance called "The Word Hand Research Rehearse," in which we talked about our process, as well as did this drawing performance at in 2014 New Structure in Portland, Southeast Portland, another venue that's sadly lost to us. In this, on the right, dancer Linda Austin is wired with a recorded text that she listens to and calls out phrases from randomly each time she would do it, while Linda Hutchins on the left and myself on the right, with fistfuls of dark pencils, would try and capture what we were hearing with kind of mirror writing from the central axis from the body. So we were building up these nets of the words that we were hearing, and a close-up of some of that is on the left. There we go. At the same time, 2012, I was bringing some of this energy into my solo work. I was awarded a residency at Crow's Shadow Institute for the Arts, which is a wonderful print center founded by the artist James Lavador on the Umatilla Reservation in Eastern Oregon. And pictured on the left is Frank Jansen, who at the time, he's now retired, was the master printer, wonderful human being and a fabulous printer. It was such a privilege to work with him. And I began working on a series that I called Unalphabetic. And you see those lithographs on the right. Some of them, one of them completed, but the other is in progress. And let's see if I can move it again. Here are two of those finished. On the left, it's Uncrushable, and on the right, it's unbeholden, and there's a third one not pictured that's unabashed. So in the order would be A, B, C. The lithographs themselves were spurred by an event that happened while I was at Crow's Shadow, and a conversation about that. And I realized that I really was interested in this little tiny prefix of un that took the word crushable, vulnerability, and changed it into something that, that cannot be moved, uncrushable. So I started looking at different ways in which meaning so changes by these little remarks. And I would have liked to have done a whole alphabet of these, but we had 2 weeks, and this is as far as we got. And here are details of the lithographs with, this lovely transparency. Artist residencies have been really important for me. They're a place of freedom. There's a place to really focus in and kind of free oneself from normal daily cares, worries, judgments, those kinds of things. Besides Caldera, I've attended Gentile and Ucross in Wyoming, and Birdcliff and Yaddo in upstate New York. And these are some drawings at Gentile that I did at Gentile. Again, kind of riffing off of letter forms, but not really attempting to have anything that's readable, and continuing with that idea of unalphabetic. These are 2 works on paper from around the same time, from 2014. On the left is Sad Birds from a Louise Gluck poem, and on the right, the title of this is So Slow She. And that's from a story by Eudora Welty. That really struck me, because there's this phrase in the story in which the character was described as, quote, so slow she could spend the whole afternoon tracing with her eyes the way the tail of the sea went through the loop of the L on the Coca-Cola bottle. And that phrase stayed with me and really seemed to hold, it still seems to hold for me, something of the essence of abstraction, and why for so long I was kind of interested in the forms of writing, of the form of the written form of language. So I wanted to commemorate it with this drawing. In 2015, I began a stint as the art and design school director at Portland State University. And for a time in there, I was also interim associate dean and for administration. And my undying admiration for all the artists who not only teach, but like Mel and Scott and Mark Mitchell, curate, direct institutions, do administrative work. It's really hard to do. It cuts down your time, and it also cuts down your brain power for studio work. But I think for all of us, it's important, as it was for me, to be in there. So during that time, I felt like I wanted some material color just to hang around, move around and handle. And close at hand were stacks of art journals. I began cutting out the largest pieces of color I could find, not thinking I was doing collages, but really just wanting to move things around, looking for new shapes. And I started cutting out the full page flat color gallery ads. I would rip those out and cut out the text. And for a while, I became really excited and involved in this idea of drawing by cutting. What you see on the wall are pages of the gallery ads from the magazine Art Forum, which is more of a square format. And I felt like these looked like glyphs. They might be made into some kind of a new strange alphabet. And so for a while, I was fascinated with that. And these are other stacks of the same kind of thing from the art magazine Freeze. Again, I would rip them out, lay them down randomly, cut them out, and rather than considering the compositions, I would just kind of grab a bunch, and they were all really interesting to me, and I wasn't quite sure what I was going to do with them, but I did a number of different things, some gouache paintings, some drawings, and a wall of Sumi drawings, Sumi ink drawings, where I was thinking, you know, what does this look like when the color is taken away? And I was pretty surprised to find such a figurative element coming into them, and you know, thinking about how graphic designers know that that's what draws our eyes, and you know, it's obviously no mistake, and so that was a way that I started thinking about, you know, letting the figurative into my work whenever it seems to beckon, and those cutouts themselves, I think were at the basis of me doing another residency at the Watershed Center for Art Publishing and Research at Pacific Northwest College of Art in Portland. I worked with Matthew Letzelter, the director of the program and a professor there, and a fabulous grad student, Travis Lober, who worked as my master printer. And we did a lot of different things there, including using the magazines as basis for laser cut wood relief plates. We did serigraphs. These were made, they're super duper high-end scans made on a flatbed scanner, and then printed with a lot of post-production work that Travis helped me with, and I felt that they, in a really straightforward way, captured what I liked, what I was interested in about these magazines, and you know, with this process of this collection and making this work, I found myself kind of hearkening back to that beginning, where I was using a print source without realizing that that's what I was continuing, using a print source, excising, cutting away, seeing what happens. So there are 6 of these large scale prints that are about 50 inches by 40 inches. We almost made them bigger. The printer would do that, and I wanted to make them bigger and give them a real conversation with a painting space. But at the last minute, my framers said, oh, by the way, if you go any bigger than 50 inches, you know, they're going to become almost impossible to frame for the plexiglass. So we just scaled them down a little bit of a tweak to keep them within some reasonable bounds. 2 more of these. This series is called AMFR, and the AM is abstraction machine, and the FR is for Freeze magazine, where they come from, and then they have a number, each of them. And here's a little bit of a close-up. They're, in a sense, they're photographs. I didn't want to glue anything down or to make them a collage, but I liked the idea that these were pieces that were free-floating and could change, and sometimes did change, but would be captured there. But there is that Trompe-l'oeil effect, where you can see the shadows and the edges and something of the materiality. Even though it's really thin, you get a sense of that dimension of pieces lying on top of each other. They were shown along with a number of paintings in a 2019 solo exhibition I had at Elizabeth Leach Gallery. This show is called Memo. There's one shot of the gallery there, and there's another shot towards the other end. These are two of the paintings from 2019 that were in the exhibition. On the left is Pointer, and this is acrylic and flash on linen over panel. And on the right is Sailor, acrylic on linen over panel. And two more are on the left, Untitled Blue Splinter, and on the right, Untitled Purple Eye. Again, acrylic and flash on linen over panel. I don't really think of myself as being influenced by the environment, but sometimes, leaving the studio, I would think about, why did I make that decision? What's up with that? What's happening with that? Where did that come from? And at one point, walking home after working in the studio, my studio's in a building, an industrial building right next to the rail yard in Southeast Portland, and I would walk over this bridge that goes over the rail yard. There's a warehouse with these skylights, and often all of these containers there waiting to go their way. And some of them, there's a certain kind of container that's hot pink that always really caught my eye. So it's interesting sometimes to stop and think about, not really looking at something, but it coming into the work in some way. Two more paintings that were in the 2019 show, Monogram 1 and 2. Here I'm kind of re-engaging a little bit with some of the letter forms. Monogram kind of calls to this idea of initials, the way initials would be embroidered on linens and handkerchiefs. But what really started to change a little bit and came to fore in my work was starting to anchor, if I can use my cursor here, these little areas of stripes on the edge. I would begin, after laying down a ground, just kind of making a commitment to one shape with something that was a little bit more intensely painted, and then having to deal with that. So I was trying to give myself something that would be almost deliberately a little bit a decision that you might make at the end. I was trying to make at the beginning, so then it would just kind of force me into a way of thinking that I might not otherwise have. So this is Monogram 4, also in the show. And this, I'm sorry, that's 3, Monogram 3. And this was called Monogram 4 at this time. This was in 2020, when we were going into lockdown. This was done as the next paintings were mainly in my garage, where and that time of being locked down and confined might account for it becoming a little bit more intense in terms of pattern. Here I started with this area here of the checkerboard, so it was kind of an investment. And though all of this went through a lot of change all the way around, there's a lot of decisions that change in there. I would have this one area that I would try and maintain. At this time, I'm a little bit less, I'm losing the ideas of letter forms or thinking about reading so much, although there are some of those movements associated with cursive writing. And I was in the studio, and I had this book, which is on the right, of the work of Sonia Delaunay, and this painting, this beautiful painting, I think it's called 3 Women. It's one of her simultaneous fashion paintings. And I had that up propped up on the table. And I also wanted to remind myself what that last painting was, because it was no longer in the studio. And so I it's in a lovely monograph brochure that the Ford Family Foundation has published for all the Hallie Ford Fellows. And so I had that propped up, and I was really surprised by this similarity. I hadn't known about this particular painting by Sonia Delaunay, although I certainly knew and admired her work. And I think that rather than it being so much influence or appropriation, I like the term that the French painter Bernard Piferetti uses when he talks about this, and he says not appropriation but apparition. So this sense that things come in and come through almost without intention. If they're important to you, they somehow seem to find their place, and then sometimes after the fact you find a place where you connect them to, I suppose. So the other two paintings from that lockdown period, on the left is Cat Cow, and on the right is Apprentice. And Apprentice is another one of the paintings that's in the current Schneider Sensate Objects exhibition. And let's see what we've got next. Then I wanted to, there are two more projects briefly to go over. In 2019, I was invited by the curator of the Sun Valley, the Sun Valley Museum of Art, Courtney Gilbert, to make new work in connection with an exhibition the museum was doing to commemorate the centennial of women's suffrage. And it was in a larger exhibition titled Deeds Not Words. I did a short residency trip up to Ketchum and Haley, Idaho, stayed in the Haley House, Ezra Pound's birthplace, a really interesting house that's been redone with arts and crafts era decoration. We visited libraries. I went to the State Archive. I did all this trying to understand and looking for some way to bring something about this time into my work, wondering how I could make abstract paintings from this specific brief, the accomplishments of women in passing the 19th Amendment, which got the vote. I love the historical research, but I certainly wasn't going to be able to illustrate it or interested in illustrating it. So again, it was this idea of apparition. I forgot. I learned, loved, and forgot a lot of this information in terms of my studio work. Put it aside and letting it cook behind in the background. I always think of it kind of coming up literally behind my head and see what would happen. And eventually I began to center my focus on the aspect of the Silent Sentinels, who were a group of suffragists led by Alice Paul and the National Women's Party. And they demonstrated in front of the White House during Woodrow Wilson's presidency for over 2.5 years, 6 days a week. Women would be standing silently outside the White House gates, holding banners. They didn't speak. Altogether, over 2,000 women took part. When one left or was arrested, another one would take her place. Something around 500 women were arrested over that time, and many served time in jail. The Sentinel paintings are loosely based on the form of the protest banner, not literally, but that kind of became the directions for my compositions. I wanted to evoke, as well as that particular struggle, the range of domestic and social and political battles that were raging at the time, some of which continue: property rights, dress reform, classism and racism, of course, but and also policing of women's bodies. I also wanted to reference the private and public nature of the struggle for women's rights. So I took the opportunity to, let myself be influenced by the pattern and decor of that era, from the Victorian to the arts and crafts. I did a lot of research into that as well. And I took the opportunity to design wallpaper that would give this installation in the museum's project room the feeling of a Victorian drawing room. So each of these Sentinel paintings has its own subtitle. I guess I'll go back. Oops, sorry, wrong way. So this is banner, frame, banner, window, frame, shield, and vessel. This is banner. And there's a detail on the left, and on the right, you can see the painting hung on the wallpaper, and the wallpaper motif is kind of a banister from a stairway, but could also possibly think of it as those prison bars. This is shield. Window. Frame. And the detail there. And then coming to a close, I had another opportunity earlier this year to do a painting and wallpaper installation when the Hallie Ford Fellows exhibition was given another iteration at Oregon Contemporary in Portland. That the earlier exhibition at the Jordan Schnitzer Museum and this one here were both curated by Janelle Porter, who was fantastic to work with and gave me a lot of support, as did the Hallie Ford Foundation, the Ford Family Foundation. In doing this, I had been making these kind of small portrait size works. I liked that the idea of a private relationship with a viewer versus, the more public of the large scale, thinking about the paintings being like looking into a mirror or maybe reading a book, but doing the Sentinel piece at Sun Valley, I became really interested in this idea of the periphery and again with the larger print work to engage the body. I guess I'm learning what people really get, the punch that they get from large scale works. So I wanted to another opportunity to play with activating that space. And I made a fairly modest proposal, and Janelle came back with this great opportunity of a 30 by 12 foot wall. And so on these hanging two paintings only seemed to be the best solution. The left is the window from the Sentinels group, and on the right there's a newer painting that I had done called Good Listener, and that you can see in a little bit closer on the wallpaper on the left. And on the right is an unfinished painting that kind of a suspended painting that I used as the tile for the wallpaper. So we photographed that. And I worked with Chris Blackmore, who's been a fantastic digital design assistant for me. And she helped. We rotated and knitted it all together into a pattern. Even though the wallpaper is made as a one-off, it's printed on self-adhesive paper. And so it's not, we don't expect it to have a life after it's removed from the wall. In this case, they were able to do that, and this wallpaper is now in the offices of Oregon Contemporary. So if you make your way back there, you could see them. And there's another close-up shot. So that is just about it. I have one more painting that I completed this year. Although it began in 2018 and there are a series of paintings underneath, it's using some of the same elements. It's a little bit larger scale, a little bit looser. And, I'm thinking about trying to push out the space, less puzzle-like forms fitting together. There's a detail there, so you can see still some of the stripes and a variety of edges. A shot in my studio of the generative drawing that I do, still sometimes bringing back longingly, but I don't know if they'll come back deliberately. Some of those cutouts as frames, but that idea, I think, of the frame is important to me in the way that I work. Another shot of some color drawings, colored pencil, watercolor, gouache on the top left, some iPad digital drawings that may find their way into paintings, and 2 studio shots of in-progress works, not finished, but I thought it might be nice to show you a little bit more about where I am right now. And that's it. I want to thank again all of you for your attention and for being here. And again, thanks to Scott and Mel for the opportunity to be in the show, and also for doing this talk, seeing my work in different situations and contexts, and also having this opportunity to kind of go through things again. It always shows me something different, and I really appreciate the opportunity. So thank you.
Thank you, Pat. If you would like to stop sharing your screen, we have time for questions. Just a reminder for everybody at home, you could type your questions into the chat, or if you would like to ask Pat directly, you could unmute yourself and share your screen. And just to get started, there is a question from Martin Steele in the chat. The question is, though painted on linen over panel, the surfaces appear to be quite pristine, i.e. not showing a fabric substrate. Is that the case, or is that the consequence of the reproduction?
I think it's a little bit of both, and I think it varies from area to area, and it also varies over time as I work from piece to piece in different ways. But the ones that are in the show, I think, tend to be that kind of I guess pristine is a nice word, surface. But those in particular would be done by layer after layer of thin fluid acrylic, and that buildup accounts for that. One of the paintings in the show is done on panel, and so with panel, there's obviously a different surface there.
Thank you, Pat. Opening it up for anybody at home, Jerry, you unmute yourself, please.
There we go. Thanks, Scott. Pat, great to see you and to hear about your work. My question, and it starts as an observation, is, and it's something that you just touched on, but I don't think it's a focus of your work, but when I see these paintings, the attention and the sophistication of the color is pretty remarkable. And I also, being a painter, I think more of like the history of painting and kind of the language of early 20th century. You reference Sonia, but I also think of Picasso, Byron Brown, kind of like American abstraction. How how much is this foregrounded in your work, or is it just a byproduct of, I think of James Welling, where he'll set a bunch of conditions and then let chance and kind of intuition come into it through different aspects, but it's never the destination for him. And I don't think I'm articulating this well, but when I look at your painting, I see this kind of pretty rich reference to the history of painting. And then the color, which I respond to a lot, but it doesn't seem to be a focus of yours. So maybe if just respond to that.
Well, thank you for that. And it's nice to see you too, Jerry. There is some work in between. There's a lot of work in between that I've left out and haven't focused on everything. So there are other small series or studies and various things that I've done where I've tried thinking about color in a more deliberate way, and I certainly am looking all the time at historical and contemporary work, and I am really motivated and drawn by color. And I'm not sure I know if you're asking anything specifically about how I choose palettes or think about the content of my color work. But in that sense of apparition, I'm always, looking at work and trying to keep the door open and bring in the things that will make sense to me. And actually, I feel like I'm always trying to change up the way I handle color. And when I do something like put all these works together in a slideshow, I see something. I see a commonality that I'm kind of surprised at, and so I think it's something that develops and changes over time. And certainly, I'm looking a lot now at Matisse. I am looking at Picasso. One of the things that I'm enjoying right now is some of the earlier influences that seemed so taboo, or painting was so discredited for a while, that all seems to have fallen away, and it's all there, and it's really rich, and I find it really exciting. Does that
it does. It does. It's just there's a concern with painting, and I say painterly, not in that kind of brushy way, but just in kind of the attention to, beyond intention. Paintings always kind of come back to being a painting, and there's a formality about reading that. But yours are very sophisticated and interesting, and in a time of abstraction where it's prevalent, in the world. It's just, your work's just quite wonderful to look at. But thanks.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Thanks, Jerry. Very well put. Anybody else at home would like to ask Pat a question directly or type it into the chat, and I would be happy to read it aloud.
I do have a short specific question. I was wondering, with the AMFR series, how do you describe that work? Like, even on your labels, do you call that a photograph? Do you call it a collage?
No, they're described as archival pigment prints.
Archival pigment prints.
So, it's a scanned photograph, really, but I rather than actually signify that, I am thinking about them in relationship to painting. And so calling them prints, it makes more sense to me.
Okay, thank you. They're beautiful.
Thank you.
Pat, in the chat, question is, were the lithos done on a stone? It appeared in the photos of the printer that a stone was used.
Oh, that's interesting. No, they were done on aluminum plates, and that was one of our big worries, because we had this limited time to do it, and Frank only had so many plates out there in the shop, and it's not there's not a supply store down the block. So I had to, at the end, kind of combine things, steps that I would have kept separate had to be combined. But that shot is, there may have been lithostones in the shot. I'm not sure what's there, but we did work on aluminum plates.
Thank you, Pat. We have time for maybe one more question. Okay, we have it in the chat from Bonnie. I am interested in how digital color has entered your practice. Did you adopt it seamlessly into your other mediums?
Well, that's an interesting question, Bonnie. I think I am influenced by it. Some of the earliest digital projects that I did, like the two drawing projects that I showed initially, were there was not a lot of color in it. I did another subsequent project where I was painting all the unfamous people that were on the pages of the New York Times, and some other projects where I was looking at print, whether it was the newspaper or printouts from Google Images, and painting those as faithfully as I could, which eventually seemed to be just kind of a dead end process for me and not that interesting. But then more lately, I think with it's really more of an influence of print color than I think digital color. That last wallpaper design was shifted in digital space. And there's something that I really liked about that, because I could take a palette that I would use and have it be transformed by the program. So choices that I might not make, but there's something that's a little bit uncomfortable for me in that too. It feels like it always kind of gets transformed in the same way. So it has its limits, and I hope that answered your question. Thank you, Pat. Even though we're running out of time, I'm going to squeeze in one more from the chat from curator Mel Prest. Statement and a question. I love this sense of object and space in your work. Some of the work is framed, you talk about the frame, and the wallpaper as large space. How do you see the space of your painting and your work? Well, that's something that I think about quite a lot, because for a while I was thinking of that. Abstraction is commonly thought to come from either figuration or from landscape, from still life, but there's always a kind of space that's involved in that. And early on, I had this influence of the page more than later the screen. So I was thinking about very flat space, and some of the work would start to overlay, and it was really only be through color that I was trying to make space. And now I am like I said, allowing and glad when some of these figurative elements or other kinds of elements come in. But now I'm beginning to think about how to pull apart the space in a more interesting way. But it's always there. It's always there. Thank you, Pat. We have run out of time. Thank you for your time today and sharing your work. Thank you for participating in the exhibition. And thank you to the Elizabeth Leach Gallery for facilitating the loans of the work. Pat, any last words? Just once again, I've really enjoyed the show. Those of you who can get down to Ashland, I hope you can see it. There's also, I know Scott has it behind him, but they've done a beautiful catalog of the show with full color prints of all the work, and a wonderful essay by Sue Taylor, who is going to be coming up in a few weeks for a talk. Yes. Thank you, Pat. Thank you, everybody. Have a good day. Thanks. Thank you.